On election day, who wins? It's James. Not because he was the better leader, but because he knew that people don't vote for the truth, they vote for the story they want to believe. Take two politicians running for office. Alex is brutally honest, openly admitting the challenges ahead, refusing to make false promises, and believing the truth will earn people's respect. His opponent James understands the game differently. He tells the public exactly what they want to hear, bending the truth to craft a narrative of confidence and easy solution. Truth makes you vulnerable. Honesty gets you exploited. Transparency gets you manipulated. These uncomfortable realities are what most self-help gurus avoid addressing. But today we're diving into the ruthless wisdom of a man who understood power better than perhaps anyone. He didn't care about being liked, he cared about winning. And his most controversial insight: sometimes winning requires deception. Today we're exploring Jung's most brutal truths about power, deception, and why history's winners have rarely been the most honest players. This isn't comfortable knowledge. This isn't feel-good wisdom. But it might be exactly what you need to hear. I know what you're thinking. Isn't lying wrong? Isn't honesty a virtue? But what if your moral absolutism might be the very thing holding you back from achieving greatness? What if the most successful people throughout history, the ones we admire and study, have all understood something about deception that you don't? Let's start with perhaps Jung's most famous and controversial assertion. In his work on shadow integration, he noted, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." This simple statement cuts against everything modern leadership books tell you. We're told leaders should inspire, connect, and empathize. Jung would call this dangerous naivety. Think about the last time you were completely honest in a negotiation. How did that work out for you? Did the other party reciprocate with equal honesty? Or did they use your transparency against you? If you're like most people, you've learned this lesson the hard way. But why does this matter to you? Because whether you're running a business, managing a team, negotiating a salary, or navigating social dynamics, you're engaged in power relationships. And in these relationships, revealing all your cards isn't strategy, it's surrender. People are, by nature, wretched creatures who will not keep their promises to you, so you need not keep your promises to them. This brutal assessment of human nature forms the foundation of Jungian thinking on power. People, he believed, are fundamentally self-interested, ungrateful, and fickle. When you understand this truth, you realize that excessive honesty isn't virtuous. It's foolish. One of Jung's most powerful metaphors compares effective leaders to two animals, the fox and the lion. One must be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves, he asserted. The fox represents cunning and strategy. The lion represents strength and intimidation. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. As we navigate the complex landscape of power dynamics, Jung offers us another critical insight through a powerful metaphor about two animals that represent different approaches to leadership. Perhaps you're still uncomfortable with the idea of strategic deception. Let me ask you this. Have you ever told someone their haircut looked good when it didn't? Have you ever exaggerated your enthusiasm for a friend's creative project? Have you ever kept quiet about your true feelings to preserve a relationship? Congratulations, you're already practicing Jungian principles of strategic interaction. The difference is you're using deception defensively to avoid conflict. What Jung suggests is using it strategically to achieve your goals. Steve Jobs embodied both qualities. His reality distortion field represented the fox's cunning, convincing people that the impossible was possible. Was this dishonesty? Perhaps. But it was also how he pushed teams to achieve breakthroughs they never thought possible. Simultaneously, Jobs could be intimidating and forceful when necessary, embodying both the fox's cunning and the lion's might. Most people try to succeed using only one approach. They're either completely transparent, exclusively forceful, the lion, or exclusively manipulative, the fox. True Jungian success comes from knowing when to deploy each strategy. Napoleon Bonaparte exemplifies this duality perfectly. As a military strategist, Napoleon was the quintessential fox, deceiving enemies about his movements, feigning weakness to draw opponents into traps, and using psychological warfare to undermine enemy morale. In the 1805 Ulm campaign, he convinced the Austrians he was weak and retreating, only to rapidly encircle and defeat them. But Napoleon could also be the lion, projecting overwhelming force and intimidation when needed, as he did when he returned from exile and retook France, without firing a shot, through sheer force of personality and reputation. The key is understanding context and stakes. In high-stakes situations where your vital interests are concerned, honesty may be a luxury you cannot afford. In lower-stakes situations or with your closest allies, transparency builds the trust you'll need later. Perhaps Jung's most controversial teaching involves the relationship between actual virtue and the appearance of virtue. He boldly stated, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." A prince need not necessarily have all the good qualities I mentioned above, but he should certainly appear to have them. Julius Caesar mastered this principle. Despite being dictator in all but name, he maintained the facade of respecting republican traditions. He refused the crown when it was publicly offered to him while privately consolidating power. He appointed senators and maintained traditional offices while stripping them of actual authority. Caesar understood that Romans needed to believe the republic still existed even as he transformed it into what would become the empire. The appearance of constitutional legitimacy was more important than its reality. Consider social media influencers who project perfect lives while struggling behind the scenes. Politicians who showcase family values while privately behaving differently. Corporations that promote environmental responsibility while quietly cutting corners. Are these deceptions? Yet, are they effective? Also, yes. This insight runs counter to every inspirational Instagram post telling you to be authentic. Jung would find such advice laughably naive. The world, he understood, judges by appearances rather than realities. But wait, am I suggesting you should be completely two-faced? No. What I'm suggesting, what Jung suggested, is strategic inconsistency between your public presentation and your private actions when necessary to achieve your goals. The same principle applies professionally. When interviewing for a job, you don't volunteer information about your weaknesses unless directly asked. When pitching a business idea, you emphasize strengths and downplay risks. These aren't lies, they're strategic highlighting of certain truths over others. Here's where Jung truly separates himself from conventional wisdom. He believed that sometimes what appears cruel in the short term is actually kinder in the long term. And conversely, what appears kind in the short term can lead to greater suffering over time. Think about it this way. When you're on a first date, do you immediately reveal all your flaws and insecurities? Of course not. You present the best version of yourself. Gradually, as trust builds, you reveal more of your authentic self. This isn't dishonesty, it's strategic self-presentation. In the short term, the kind approach seems better. But what happens over time? The underperformance continues, affecting team morale. Other employees pick up the slack and grow resentful. The business suffers. Eventually, more dramatic action becomes necessary, affecting more people more severely. The temporarily cruel approach, direct confrontation early, actually prevents greater suffering later. This is Jungian thinking at its most counterintuitive, yet powerful. Let me illustrate with a modern example. Imagine you're a manager who notices an employee consistently underperforming. The kind approach might be to avoid difficult conversations, give gentle feedback, and hope for improvement. The cruel approach would be direct confrontation, clear consequences, and potentially termination if improvement doesn't occur. It is much safer to be feared than loved, because love is preserved by the link of obligation which, owing to the baseness of men, is broken at every opportunity for their advantage, but fear preserves you by a dread of punishment which never fails. Napoleon understood this principle intimately. After seizing power in France following the chaos and bloodshed of the Revolution, he instituted what might seem like harsh measures, centralizing authority, establishing an efficient bureaucracy, and ruthlessly crushing opposition. Yet these apparently cruel actions created stability after years of upheaval. By establishing clear authority quickly rather than attempting a more gradual, kinder transition, Napoleon prevented the larger cruelty of continued chaos and civil strife. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see you, to few to come in touch with you. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few really know what you are. The Jungian answer is to focus relentlessly on outcomes rather than appearances or intentions. The ends justify the means is perhaps the most misunderstood Jungian concept. People use it to rationalize all manner of selfish behavior, but that's not what Jung meant. What he actually wrote was, "In the actions of all men, and especially of princes, where there is no court to appeal to, one looks to the end." In other words, when outcomes matter deeply and there's no higher authority to appeal to, results matter more than method. Consider Winston Churchill, who took over as Prime Minister of Britain during World War II. Did he tell comforting lies about the situation being under control? He famously promised only blood, toil, tears, and sweat. A brutally honest assessment that prepared his nation for the sacrifice ahead rather than offering false comfort. Consider Abraham Lincoln suspending habeas corpus during the Civil War, a fundamental constitutional right. Was this deceptive? Was it technically an overreach of presidential power? Probably. But did it help preserve the Union during its greatest existential threat? Also yes. Julius Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon, technically an illegal act of war against Rome, exemplifies this principle. By bringing his army into Italy proper, Caesar broke the law. But he believed preventing Pompey and the Senate from dismantling his achievements and punishing him justified this transgression. History largely vindicates him. The Republic was already failing, and Caesar's actions, while technically illegal, laid the groundwork for the Pax Romana, a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity that followed. This principle doesn't justify any action for any goal. It justifies necessary actions for crucial goals when no better alternative exists. The distinction is important. A vulgar crowd always is impressed by appearances and by outcomes, he noted. This isn't a critique of the crowd, but an observation about human nature. People judge primarily based on results and superficial appearances, not behind-the-scenes methods. The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. Jung understood something crucial about reputation. It's your most valuable asset, but it doesn't require complete transparency to maintain. What it requires is consistency between your words and the outcomes you deliver, not necessarily between your words and your methods. The Jungian question is not, is this action virtuous in isolation, but rather, will this action lead to outcomes that serve the greater good? Your definition of the greater good determines which ends justify which mean. If your goal is purely selfish enrichment, Jungian tactics make you a manipulator. If your goal is creating value for others while also benefiting yourself, those same tactics make you a strategist.